welcome to Writer. I'm your host, Kat Filer, also known as KJ Filer, author of Shadowrunner. My guest today is Kevin Robinson, a quadriplegic freelance writer, photographer, and author who sees the world from a slightly different perspective. He has over 100 magazine bylines to his credit, penning a Knight Ridder syndicated Sunday column called Disabled in America, based in the Detroit Free Press. He authored the Stick Foster Mystery Series, published in hardback by Walker and Company. Kevin co-wrote a self-help book called Getting Real, The Road to Personal Redemption with Dick Todd. And most recently, he wrote a contemporary novel called The Ghostwalker File, which morphed into a heartwarming series about community. Kevin, how are you doing? I'm so glad you're here.
Good, Kat. How are you today?
Good. And we were talking about how long we've known each other, and we decided we met in the Cretaceous period.
Well, it was a while back, and you had to remind me that it was the old bulletin board system. You talk to kids today about the BBS, and they just think you're talking about, the crank-up telephone that, my grandfather had on the wall when I was a little kid.
Yep.
So, I go back further than you, but we remember some of the same times, and that BBS was very unique. Met a lot of writers from all over the country on that.
We did.
Board.
Yeah, I'm a friend of mine by the name of Vicky Swindling, she's moved on and she's now a psychologist. But at the time she was an author, and she had a magazine called Imagine, and she had invited me to submit to that. She got me on the bulletin board. It was being run by another friend, Jim True, who I still know and love. And we would leave each other messages. And then you asked me to do some PR for you because you were going to be on a Florida book tour, and I had never done PR. I had no idea how to do it.
Well, you waved the magic wand then, because man, I lose track of all the radio shows and TV shows and writers' conferences and really prestigious book signings. I mean, I sat there in Boca Raton at Meisner Plaza with, I probably sold more books that day than almost any other book signing.
Oh.
Got the best, I don't know how you got Ellie Lingner there from the Palm Beach Post, but one of the best write-ups I ever had. So when you picked up that wand, wow, you wove it in style.
I think if there was any magic involved, it was knowing that I didn't know what I was doing and figuring there was no wrong way to do it. So I would just do it. I called people and I thought, what's the worst that can happen? They would say no. Big deal. So what? They don't know me. And it was so funny because sometimes when I was talking to these people, I thought if they had any idea that I was sitting at my kitchen table, thank God my kids are at school. So that was really a lot of fun. So Kevin, when did you decide you wanted to become an author? When did you start writing, and why?
The date was 1984. I was thinking about that this morning when I woke up, and I knew I was going to do this. And it was like waking up one morning and going, I want to try this. And I'm trying to remember what I was reading at the time, because I suspect that might have had something to do with it. And it was probably a fantasy. I mean, in college, a friend got me started on Tolkien and, Anne McCaffrey and Elizabeth Moon. And so that probably started it. And I started writing a fantasy, trilogy. Everybody was doing trilogies. And so it had to be a trilogy. And I started working on that. But in the meantime, I went to the library, took out every book I could find on writing. And at one time or another in the Johnson County, Kansas library, I checked out everything there was to check out. And wonderful books, Lawrence Block, Telling Lies for Fun and Profit, and reading his column in Writer's Digest. And that column where he addressed everybody as if they were students, in a junior high classroom almost, was so full of nuggets, helpful nuggets, that within a year I was writing for Writer's Digest. So I was just vacuuming up these tips and tricks and whatever, and couldn't stop. It took me, 35, 40 years to sort of set it aside. And almost each time I said, okay, enough, some new idea would come and I'd wake up and start writing again. So it's a strange addiction.
It is. Do you remember what your first byline was?
Yeah, I can't remember specifically, but I learned from you about the throwaway newspapers. And I've taught many a class to beginning wannabe writers using that as a way to get started.
Yeah.
You build up so I'm sure my first 3 or 4 or 5 actual credits were, free copies or 2 cents a word or something along that lines for papers that nobody saw, but maybe a neighborhood outside Kansas City and know that it would get them thrown in their driveway. So, but the first notable thing that I sold was a short story to Dr. Schmidt at Analog Science Fiction, Science Fact.
Oh, cool.
And at the time, I had picked up a mentor, Harry Mark Petrakis. I'd seen him at an Avila Writers Conference in Kansas City. And I was one of the 12 lucky ones whose submitted work was going to be passed on to him. And he said in the beginning of the conference, his keynote address, he said, I haven't had a chance to look at your writing yet because I just came from the Big Pine Key Writers Conference, but I'm going to do it tonight in the hotel room, but tomorrow I'll have it all there. So on the way out, he goes past me. I'm in my wheelchair in the back of the lecture hall. He goes right by me. He goes to the registration desk just outside the door and says, do you know who Kevin Robinson is or where he is? And she goes, yeah, he's in a wheelchair. I don't think he's come out yet. He comes back in and hands me this 20-page sample of my work. And every page was covered with red.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, so he taught me to edit. And back to the original story, Stanley Smith sent me a very nice, personally handwritten rejection slip. But he also had a little paragraph in there about why he wasn't buying it.
Yeah.
And because of what Petrakis taught me about cutting, editing, I broke down that paragraph into 7 specific things. And I went back at that short story until I had addressed all 7 of those things as well as a beginner could do. And I wrote a nice letter back. I said, thank you so much for your commentary on my work. I said, I think I identified the 7 things that you were concerned with. I tried to address them. Did I understand what you were trying to teach me? And thank you. And that's all. And that was a $400 check.
Oh, wow.
And a contract. And I sold him a second one. So, learning to edit, that if someone is there for you to teach you that in the beginning, what a difference. Because Petrakis used to say it's like puzzle pieces.
It is.
Don't have to go together a certain way. That's the wonder of writing. They don't all have to go in the perfect place. They can be moved around until you like the picture or the picture is what you want it to be. So
yeah,
that was my start.
Well, you've been a big part of my journey, and you and also Frank. I had a mentor, Frank Green, and I really wish that he had lived to see this book. Although I would be catching hell because he can, and I'm going to be specific. He hated that I liked sci-fi. He couldn't believe I was reading sci-fi, even good sci-fi, Ursula Le Guin even. And he said, "Pablum for the masses, pablum for the masses." He was desperately trying to get me to become a Southern literary writer.
Harry Mark Petrakis was so Greek classical storyteller that you just expected the chorus to get up and start chanting to you in the middle of his stories. They were so powerful. But when I landed a contract with Walker and Company for my mysteries, I thought he'd be so excited for me, and he went, well, that's a good start. That's a good step. But, you've got to get back to mainstream novels at some point. Same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So where do we fit? Right? I mean, what is our thing, right? Will I ever write like Petrakis? No, of course not. His short stories and novels and the movies made from them are incredible. I don't have that gift, but what gift I do have, I try to use to its best advantage. So
I think we all find our place. I think that your Stick Foster series really spoke to a lot of people. I was I mean, I was interested to see if I had done a good job as a publicist, but I think it was more than that. It was the books themselves. I was shocked at the number of people that would show up to your book signings. Just all standing there patiently waiting, you know.
Did I tell you about my very first signing? I
No.
cried. No, I literally cried. They did a feature on me in the Kansas City Star, and it was a local Walden Books or Dalton or whatever. I can't remember, one of the big ones. And there was this line of people, which of course blew my mind. I'd never signed anything in my life. No one had ever asked me for a signature. I had no clue. So the first two or three people, come up and I sign their books, and I'm trying to behave in a way that's appropriate, even though I have no experience whatsoever. And the third or fourth person in line was this guy with no arms.
Oh,
He had he had taken my book off a bookshelf with his feet.
oh
He
gosh.
shuffled it across the floor to my table. He picked it up with his foot, put it in front of me, and opened it to the page I was supposed to sign on, and held it with his foot. And he said, "It is about damn time somebody wrote about disabled people
Yeah.
in a positive, realistic way." And I just lost it. The tears were coming down my cheeks. It was like, wow. So yeah, when
Yeah.
that happens, and you hit a nerve somewhere, or at least you found some audience that hears you and feels you. Wow, there's nothing like it.
Yeah. And I think again, when they say write what you know, well, there you go. And sometimes I think that publishers are a little short-sighted in terms of who is the audience. Their marketing department is telling them what the latest fashion is. They're not really telling them what people want to read. And we talked a little bit about this. If they've got a gay author this year, that's it. We're done with that. If we've got a black author, that's it. Now we've done our diversity thing, or female author, or any of the other subjects. If there's, any subject, they get one or two, and then they think the market is saturated. And it's just such a short-sighted way of doing things.
Well, they play it safe. And of course, I found out that at Walker and Company with my mystery series, that I was what they call a mid-list writer. And the way that was defined to me by the writers group I attended in Kansas City was that they know to a book how many they can sell to libraries. So they make a print run so that you'll have a few hundred copies to sell to your friends and family, but they know that 1,900 or 2,100 or whatever are going to be automatically purchased by libraries around the country. And so it's a guaranteed income that they get off their mid-list writers, but for every 7 or 8 mid-list writers, they've made enough money they can pay a big name to push something up to the book bestseller charts. And so when you find out you're with a publisher that never gives a mid-list writer a reprint, that's hard to swallow. You don't know that till you get into the industry and you find out how it works. And of course, how I got out of that was my editor left Walker to take over Ellery Keene Mystery Magazine. A new guy came in just as a big published, I don't know, a study survey, but it showed that 80% of mystery writers were women who bought mystery books, and that 75% of that 85% preferred women authors.
Mm-hmm.
So the new guy that took over at Walker and Company, within 6 months, had fired every male writer. I mean, one of them was a LA cop that I got to know. I mean, he'd sold 7 books in his series and sold out every print run. But, Mr. Svengali decided what he needed around him was more young female writers, and he had the perfect excuse to do it, and we all went out the window. So yeah, the business can be harsh.
It can be. And then the indie publishing industry took off. I guess Amazon had a lot to do with that. Suddenly, the readers could connect with their authors. And that was really something that I feel like the publishers worked really hard to keep us apart, keep everybody from, I don't know if that was about keeping control of the situation or if they wanted to keep the mystique. I don't know what that was about, but with social media, and I have to say, if indie authors had not taken off at the time of social media, I'm not sure it would have been that successful. But now you look for your favorite author online. You might find them on Facebook or Instagram or someplace. And you make a comment. Next thing you know, you're talking to somebody, and it's somebody whose books you're reading. So I think that really worked for the indie community. It also changed the experience for most writers, I think, and that was that the indie community believes in cooperation. So you're not having to get past an agent or a publisher, and they understand the power of networking. And that was something that when I finally put Shadowrunner out, I did not realize the power of networking. And of course, having done publicity for authors all this time, I had things that people have to start working for when they put out their first book. It was already there for me, so it was not hard.
Yeah, in my experience with mystery, a new guy shows up at a radio station or a book signing or whatever, and nobody has much expectation. But when Sisters in Crime sets up a signing for 4 or 5 of the top selling, well, the bookstore fills up. I mean, you and I last saw each other, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think at Mohawk Resort up in New York.
One other time in Tampa, but yeah, the last
that's
time we
right.
spent any
Yes,
time
right. I
together.
did see you in Tampa, but at Mohawk, I was up there for Stephen King's book signing. He and his wife were there for a weekend, and the line went down the stairs with three columns of stairways. You remember that grand stairway to the hotel, out through the lobby, down to the greenhouse at the bottom of the hill. That was the line. And so, you always keep thinking, wow, will I ever be a Stephen King? Will I ever have that kind of a following? Well, unless there's a publicity budget behind you, or unless you have a group of people willing to work together, the chances are very slim. So, but you and I have both been to book signings where you just go, wow, is this even possible?
Yeah.
But we've also been very fortunate, and we've had some wonderful responses from people to our work, even at our level. So that's, when you get it, you got to enjoy it.
Well, and I think also if your expectation isn't that you're going to be an instant bestseller, then just everything that comes along is something to be grateful for. So, yeah. And I'm not saying that I haven't sold books. I've definitely sold books. My publisher's very, very happy with me. But I am also going to say that that's not really something that I did. You got me into this. You got me doing publicity for authors. It's all your fault.
Well, to spot someone else's talent and for them to consider, well, let me try this. That was very adventurous. I had no idea what I was getting. And of course, when the bottom fell out years later and I disappeared, it took me a while to get myself back together and go, holy crap, what a miracle that was. That she said yes, and that she was willing to step out into whole new territory and represent me. That was remarkable. So, the fact that I lost my publisher, and the fact that my marriage, went to hell in a handbasket, and my church showed me the door. All those things happened. And at that point, it's interesting. I sort of lost my interest in writing for a while, but I turned to music.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I thought I knew from you was how to network, how to promote. And the next thing you know, you got bands in Kansas City were begging me to take them on. And I was managing tours out into Colorado and back for bands that were big in Kansas City, but had never played anywhere else but the suburbs. And so one thing leads to another in strange ways in life, but sometimes we don't know how amazing it is until long after, and we look back and go, wow, why did that happen? Well, I don't know, but here's what came of it. And
Yeah.
so you were one of those miracles for
Well,
me.
you were one for me too. The friendship was one thing, and then the the connections I made because I was with you. Then I got another client and another client and another client. Then I got involved in the writers festival there in Jacksonville, and that led to, well, could you be the author liaison? Well, the next thing you're doing work for them, even though you don't technically work for them, and then they hire you, and that just became a thing. And I told somebody recently, somebody said, "How come you stopped doing publicity?" And I said, "Because I became friends with my clients and I didn't want to bill them."
Uh,
So I
I,
quit my job, but I didn't stop doing publicity.
Ellie and I were talking about that, and of course, when you were doing all that work for me, I was living in public housing.
Yeah.
I mean, I was divorced and living in HUD housing, and my rent in HUD housing was half of what I had coming in, for Social Security disability. So, I kept thinking of the pennies on a dollar that I might have given you along the
Oh
way.
gosh.
And wow, I have no idea. I had no idea at the time what I had, and I had no idea how I underpaid for that
Oh gosh, no.
gift.
And
But
and there's different forms of payment, and the one thing that you and I have in, we're millionaires in terms of friendship. So yeah, that's been
no, but
amazing.
do you ever feel I'm convinced that all the most amazing blessings in my life have literally come out of left field.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
over and over and over. The places I'm working hardest to get to, or the things I'm working hardest to achieve, never come to anything.
yeah,
But the stuff that and the people that come in over the left field fence,
absolutely.
unexpected.
Yeah,
Whoa, that just makes life. Those are the exciting things you look back and go, thank you. You can't help but be grateful when you look at those moments closely.
I agree. I totally agree. Um, so you are also a children's author, and the grandfather and grandmother bear stories happens to be a particular favorite of my granddaughter.
Uh,
Can you talk about that? How did you start? How'd you do that?
yeah, well, you get me back on track if I've got to step back a bit, and I sometimes lose my place. So you bring me back if I lose it. But when I woke up one morning, and it's often what happens, you wake up in the morning and you just got to write down this concept. And the concept for the Ghostwalker file was so um, bizarre, the hubris involved in even thinking of it, writing about Native Americans.
Oh yeah.
Where do I come from? Farm country in upstate New York. What do I know? I mean, sure, we studied the Iroquois and whatnot, Mohegans in school, but I know nothing. I couldn't point out a single acquaintance who was Native American at that time in my life. But I had this burning desire to write this book about John Ghostwalker. And so the first thing I did was, since I had lived in Lawrence, Kansas, where Haskell Indian Nations University is, I looked them up online to see what their English department looked like, and met two Native American authors who were professors, and asked them, I'm undertaking something I have no business undertaking, like a white boy playing blues harmonica. I did the same thing in the music field. What does a white boy know about playing blues harmonica? So I said, would you be brutal with me? Would you not only edit, I'll hire you to be my editors, but would you be brutal on me if I'm stepping out, if I'm appropriating, if I'm exaggerating, if I'm misrepresenting the spiritual nature of the community? And they agreed, and they did it. It was amazing, the gift of that. So of course, in the process of all that, they're recommending authors to me, Native American officers, Louise Eldrich and Tom Toms, and all of a sudden I came across this. I think it was written in 1912. It was an anthropologist studying a Native American tribe at the time, and he did this dissertation on these fireside tales that the chief would tell the kids. They'd gather around the fire in his big tent and tell these stories. And I was mesmerized. It just caught me. So then all I read for the next 6 months was these Native American. Now they reminded me as a child, Uncle Remus stories.
Yeah.
Brer Bear, Bear Fox, Brer Rabbit. Those tales teach you how to live. They teach you how to be a human being. Of course, the Native American children's stories are the same. So again, appropriation. Am I appropriating? If I try to write in that style, can I honor it, or will I just be a thief running away with something, a treasure that belongs to another? But I did it anyway, and I had more fun writing those stories. And I probably already told you about the illustrator. I tried to hire 4 different professional illustrators for big amounts of money. I mean, $1,200-$1,500 to do a cover, but none of them wanted to read the books. I mean, these are children's stories. You can read all of them in half an hour or 40 minutes, all 4 of them. They didn't want to read them. They just wanted to give me something they'd already done and wanted me to fall in love with that. And I was very frustrated. And a woman in New York, in Kansas City, who'd been reading these stories to her grandkids, said, my granddaughter asked if Mr. Robinson would hire her to be an illustrator. 12-year-old girl. And she sends me these watercolors she'd done of animals that just blew me away. And that, that made the series. I'd written it ahead of time. I'd even self-published it. But then when it was republished with her illustrations, then it just became something totally different. And did I have the promotional skills to get it out there? No, not really. Did I have the networking or whatever? No. But everyone who has read it has loved it. And so that, you feel good, even though, well, maybe it could have been more. And I don't think I pissed anybody off, or at least no one has voiced a complaint that I was somehow appropriating. But these are some of the most amazing. That style of writing doesn't much exist anymore, other than in Native communities and oral tradition. So
yeah, I was just talking to a friend and somebody that you might have seen her interview, Tara Allred, about the power of story. And, I didn't really understand the power of story growing up in Florida isn't really the South, but in the southeastern area. I'm not sure what Florida is. But anyway, you read whatever your teacher tells you have to read. And then we moved out west for a while, and I started to I already knew Jerry Hausman, who writes Native American mythologies and West Indian mythologies. I think his daughter is married into the Marley family. But anyway, he had a lot of help out there, but he started telling me about these cultures and where to go and what to visit and who to talk to. And I started really understanding the power of stories. You're talking about these fireside stories, and that's exactly what they are. I mean, what do you do at night? You tell stories. You sit down with the kids and tell stories. It's a bonding thing. It's a communal thing. It's a way of remembering your history. It's a way of remembering your ancestors. It's a way of remembering your culture's stories. And they may not even be specific to your culture, but just the things that everybody knows the story. And I have found, and how this is with kids, that the kids want you to read that book over and over and over and over. And I think that this is that part of the campfire thing. You're at night, you're getting ready for bed, and you just want somebody to tell you that good story. It ends okay.
And there's something magical about using that. And the Native American tradition is largely, animal people.
Yes.
I mean, there's human being people and there's animal people, and so children hearing the stories about the animals, there's nothing threatening.
No.
Even if the story is aimed at their disobedience or at their willfulness or whatever it happens to be, lesson is trying to be taught, it's not threatening.
Right.
when there's an animal involved, and it's mesmerizing. I fell in love with it, and thank God. I mean,
It was a really good series. It does tell the things that you would like to tell your kids. Um, yeah, grandfather and grandmother bear. First of all, grandparents, the kids want to hear the stories from the grandparents. So that's brilliant. And then using an animal is another thing. So yeah, I don't know what it is. Well, I do know what it is. My granddaughter's particularly interested in chickens now. So if you could write a series of chicken wisdom,
oh,
that would be really great. When I was up there the last time, we had stopped through a fast food place and she was eating her lunch, and all of a sudden she picks up her chicken nugget and she goes, "This is not chicken." Puts it because I think she knows it is. She's figured it out. But she
uh,
loves chickens. Chickens are very wise. Just ask her.
uh, growing up around animals. Of course, I grew up on farms. All my first jobs were for farmers in my area. So I have to say, most of the really important things, life lessons I learned from farmers and from
Yeah.
tending animals and from spreading manure on the fields, and all those things that go along with it. And yeah, your granddaughters, both of them, are gonna be so enriched by that environment that they live in with animals around them.
Well, and Chelsea was enriched, and so was Christopher, by knowing you early on. I know you know this, but I'm going to tell the tale to the listeners.
Uh-oh.
You and Rob took them to dinner, and Christopher was telling everyone, "Do you know who this is? That's Kevin Robinson." He was so enthralled with you being an author. And you were the first author he'd ever known, and it was such a magical thing for him that he knew an author.
Getting to know your family. Well, I mean, you just made us part of the family. But
Oh,
even when Rob left, Rob was worked at Craig Rehab out in Denver, Colorado, and occasionally would tour with me when I'd be traveling as a traveling aide. But yeah, he fell in love with the kids too.
oh,
I mean, my gosh, when Chelsea first took me for a walk around the lake in your neighborhood, and just part of the time sitting on my lap, part of the time holding my hand and half pulling me and showing me who lived where, and this is where I saw the frog, and sometimes there'll be turtles on that log, and it was priceless. Every moment of that was priceless. So I having come back in contact with her so many years later, and have her not be offended when I say, "Oh, is that my Chelsea?" So
yeah.
that was fun.
No, she's honored and she remembers. It's a good thing for her, and I think that you had an effect on her in ways that you may not realize. She was a very aggressively mobile child. I don't know how else to put it. But sometime after she met you, she started learning how to make friends. So there was something about that interaction with a stranger. Up until then, she'd been a little bit holding back with strangers. But you and Rob just made her feel real good. But I think that this is another thing too. The kids grew up knowing authors, and I just had a conversation with Robert Gwaltney about this. The reason that he is an author is because sometime in middle school or grade school, he realized that one of his friends' mothers was an author, and he had thought of them as unicorns. Like
Yeah, right.
come on, I'll never meet one of those. And then he started thinking, well, I could be one. I could actually be one. And I think that with my kids, they grew up with possibilities because of being around people who wrote. And of course, writing has to be a labor of love, or you're not going to do it. You hope that you can become the next Stephen King or Suzanne Collins or J.K. Rowling's, but nobody really does. And you still you connect with your readers, and those are relationships too. So anyway, so I wanted to talk about, speaking of relationships and being real about things, you wrote a book called Getting Real: The Road to Personal Redemption. You co-wrote that with Dick Todd. Why don't you tell us about that one?
That was an interesting spur of the moment thing. as I was being shown the door, after 40 years in my conservative Presbyterian church, as I was being shown the door, I was visiting other churches in the area. And the big Presbyterian, First Presbyterian Church in Lawrence, Kansas, had a very good preacher. I mean, this guy was good. He was personable. He just seemed like a nice guy, and we clicked. And we started having lunch together once a week at a Chinese restaurant there in Lawrence, Kansas. And, one day he came to lunch, and I just realized something's different. Yet when you develop that sensitivity where even if somebody doesn't say anything or look a certain way, you just feel something's off.
Yeah.
And he just pours out this story to where he had just screwed up royally and didn't know what to do, and knew perfectly well the consequences were probably going to end his marriage and his career as a pastor and everything else. And he lays all this on me. And of course, my first reaction was, wow. I mean, I thought I was making a friend, but this sort of proves it. Nobody lays that out first time to somebody they only met 6 months ago or so. That was kind of very humbling that he would share this with me. And it was a situation where I said, my first words out of my mouth were, Dick, you got to own it. Start today, and you got to own it, and we'll go through the consequences together. I'll be there for you. But, you got to find your integrity and deal with it head on. And he did. And so the next time we met, I had already thought about, this is a teaching moment for both of us. I'm coming out of a 25-year marriage and a 40-year relationship with the church, kicked to the curb for different reasons. Mm-hmm. Dick is coming to a radical change in his entire life, 28 years as a pastor, disappearing overnight. And, as he said it in Getting Real, in one of his chapters, about they couldn't wait to scrape me off their shoes. Isn't that what Jesus taught, right? Isn't that the forgiveness or, the churches? So I said, let's make this a teaching moment. Let's write about it. We'll do alternate chapters, be brutally honest. If you disagree with me, say so. If I disagree with you, I'm going to say so. We're going to give readers two perspectives on clearing the bullshit out of your life and getting real.
Yeah.
And, can we do this together? And he said, yes. Now, I had no idea how much integrity and risk he would put into that. But how many years ago was that? Was that 2011 or 2000? I can't remember when that was. I read, now I listen, but I used to read that book to myself twice a year.
Yeah.
Because I knew my chapters pretty much by heart, but his chapters, every time you read them, they sink in deeper. Yeah. And you check yourself and you start looking back toward reality rather than the fantasy we tend to build in our head. So that project just came out of a disaster in both of our lives, but the timing was perfect to put it down in a way that hopefully not tells people what to do, but gives them some clues as to how to look at themselves in the mirror and say, what do I need to clear out of here that is not serving my best interest?
The thing I took away from that book, and it's a life-altering read for me, and you sell yourself short because your chapters are just as good. But the thing I took out of that was there were two things. One was to be honest with yourself. You can't deceive yourself, even if you're trying. You know the truth. It's in there, and you can pretend, but you're going to catch up to yourself. But the other thing that I took out of that is that in these situations where just everything breaks loose and it's not going the way you thought at all, and it may seem even unfair, those are actually times in your life when, if you do accept it as a teaching moment, then something comes out of it. In my own personal life, my experience with breast cancer, twice. The first time I thought I learned my life lessons, and the second time I was real ticked off at God. I thought, what have I done to deserve to be back here? We already went through this. And but when I think back on it now, the bad times in my life, however, every minute was a teaching moment. And somebody asked me quite some time ago, if I could go back in time, would I want to erase that? And I wouldn't, because I wouldn't be the person I am today. And that's what I got out of your book, is that these things hurt, but those are like master classes in life.
All the psychologists tell us that the human being learns far more constructive info from failure than we do from success. Dick went on from there. He moved to Baltimore, went to work for a huge construction company as a HR guy. I mean, he was like the chaplain for this giant company. And every Monday night, he was doing the Get Real session with homeless, addicted men at the Baltimore Project. And he did that for 7 years. Monday night was Get Real night. And so what we did that helped us, he turned it into something that helped them. And I thought, well, that's a miracle. That isn't that incredible to see that. But then he turned it into a novel, and I have got to plug it. It's called Sitting Still.
No,
It's the best novel I've ever read about someone dealing with alcoholism, and having been to program after program, and and it was not some homeless guy. It was a middle class guy with a great job and a great family and great education and all the benefits, who finds that alcohol has taken him down, down, down until he's literally homeless. But his ego is still intact. And can he get through it? So Sitting Still by Dick Todd, Richard Todd, I think is the title if you're searching for it. Oh my God, if you have someone in your family, or if you want to learn more about what it's like to overcome alcoholism. So this all came from, Dick taking that moment and allowing it to be a teaching moment for not only him, but how many thousands of people since.
yeah,
And just a quick story about his Monday night class. Newcomers would come into the class. Somebody newly in the program or whatever would come to the class, and they'd start spouting their rationalization stories. And all the guys would put their hands up. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit.
right.
It was a perfect model, for just saying, okay, we're all in this together. We know where you've been. We've been there. You're not going to pull that stuff on us. It might work on your mama, but it's not working here. And oh my gosh. So yeah, it's the bad stuff that happens, or the left field stuff that we're not expecting. That's where the wonderful lessons in life are.
You're right. The left field stuff. You look up and you see it coming, and you're like, "What's this? What's this? Wait, wait, wait! I don't know if it's good or bad. Wait, it's too late. It's happening."
That's right. This is
And it's
reality.
usually good. It's usually the
Byron
really good
Katie,
stuff.
why do we know it was supposed to happen? Because it did.
Yeah, exactly.
Reality.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that that is particularly true with the people in your life. If they're there for a reason. You're either supposed to have a relationship with them, you're supposed to learn something from them. Could be a combination of all, but they're there for a reason. I don't believe in consequences. I'm sorry, not consequences. I do believe in that. I don't believe in coincidences. I definitely believe in consequences. I've had my share of those. So then I'm imagining about the same time as when the big God theory was done.
I did that right after Getting Real. I think we touched on enough of my emotional buttons, if you will, in doing Getting Real, that I wanted to try to use that kind of in the mirror honesty about what was, I was a fourth generation member of this conservative Presbyterian church. And I wanted to look at that with the same honesty Dick and I had used to look at our own messes and take responsibility for our part in it. And I probably quote Larry Coy in there somewhere, who said, it doesn't matter whether it's 90% their fault and 10% your fault. That 10% is your 100%.
Yes.
And if you're in denial about that, you're no better off than the other person who if you could measure those things, you like to think was 90% of the problem. but usually it's 50-50 or pretty darn close. We just don't like to admit that to ourselves. So I tried to apply that to my 40 years in this particular church. What was my part in this? What was their part in this? And, you know, when you turn that getting real corner and you're able to, in good conscience, call out BS when you see it and say, I'm not going to be a party to this, it allows you to think differently. And so getting it all out, you know, Pilgrim's Progress, you know, conservative Presbyterians had to read that, Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. That was, you know, mandatory. It was read to you probably when you were a child, and then you had to read it at some point on your own. But to try to look at my journey honestly, and that's, I don't know how well I did, and it wasn't written for the masses. It wasn't. Now the interesting story is, I sent out 2,500 postcards offering a free copy to 2,500 ministers across the United States in every denomination, priests and pastors and preachers, and including every pastor in my former denomination. So out of 25 offers of a free copy, I got 5 people who wanted a free copy. 4 of them from Unity kind of church background, and 1 of them a pastor in my former denomination. So, you know, that it wasn't meant for other people. And I think as writers, it's hard to swallow that something that is so pivotal, important for you to get down and write and deal with is not going to be universal.
But you know,
I think everybody is interested in, but there's some things nobody's interested in, and you have to learn how to own that.
we might be changing though. Our culture is going through a period where we're starting to face things. I'd hate to think that we're going to go backward. And I also think that I don't know if you've heard of, and I'm talking about it ad nauseum. I'm sure that Susan K. Quinn is starting to go, stop, be quiet now. But I just interviewed Susan K. Quinn, and she's a big advocate of hope punk. She's been writing dystopian fiction for years, and she said, it wasn't I forget if it was her or somebody else. It was one of the dystopian authors I know said it wasn't a manual. It wasn't a set of instructions. It's a story, you know. But now they're writing hope punk, and I see stories about community, about owning your own missed opportunities or whatever it was you did, and you think about it later and you're like, yeah, calling out your own BS like you're talking about. And I kind of think that the time may be coming. You just might have been a little bit ahead of your time. So just, you know, hang in there, because I'm seeing an awful lot. This hope punk movement and solar punk and climate punk, the idea is that sometimes you can have a conversation with somebody through a book, where if you were to try to sit down and talk to them, they'll tell you to be quiet and go away. So, yeah. And I think that is the power of storytelling.
And nobody's ever ready till they're ready.
No.
You know, that's the other thing, you know, what Jacob Glass likes to say, never give advice unless the person's asked 3 times.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's a tough one for me, because when you watch, you know, whether it's your child falling down and you're trying to teach them how to not hit their head on the coffee table, or your friend standing in the railroad track listening to their iPod to their headphones, and the train's coming, you know, there's just that stuff in some of us that just wants to help. And that's, you know, that's another one of those areas where you got to figure out the BS in your own life. If your help isn't helping, it's not help. I mean, that's one of the toughest life lessons. It doesn't matter how good our intentions are when we're trying to steer somebody away from what looks like. If they're not ready, if they're not wanting to hear it, and you're just ticking them off, that help isn't helping. Yeah. So,
well, it's your friend writing about alcoholism. He had to be ready for that. Even if your family does an intervention, if you're not ready, you're not ready. So you're not going to be receptive.
Yeah, there's a different bottom for everybody, but you have to hit it pretty much. Yeah, that lesson comes across life in lots of ways.
Yeah. So, um, how do we find our place? Um, it's not always because we're selling books. Sometimes our place is a measurement. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, yeah, your interview with which writer was it now who talked about finding your tribe? She would made a good point about that, and I think I'm different in that I I either never recognized tribes. I think that's the case with you in the beginning. I didn't recognize the importance, the significance of that friendship that had developed. When everything else went haywire, all your attention goes to wherever the present fire is, and you sort of lose track. But finding like people or a place where you I think I tend to define that as a place where you feel like you're seen and heard. I mean, at its essence, everyone wants to be in a place where you're seen and heard and accepted, warts and all. Does that happen often? No. Does that happen more frequently for some people than others? Yes. And part of finding your place is recognizing what are and what are not your strengths.
Mhm.
That is difficult. That's painful. That's taking cockleburrs. You lived in Florida, you know about cockleburrs. You
That's
know, picking those things out is, as painful on your fingers and hands as it is on whatever part of your socks or ankles or whatever you picked them up on. And but yeah, that's where do you fit in as a writer? So my thing is character development, the arc of the character's life, the consistency of the character. But like you, I chose to pick characteristics that are not everyday. They're not common. They're not the norm. I'll give you a good example. The thing I love about Ada in Shadowrunner so much is that regardless of how she came to it early on in your book, she is figuring out who she is and who she wants to be. And yet you put her in a situation where it's seemingly impossible for her to be that. That character arc doesn't seem possible. And yet you're masterful. If I don't mean to embarrass you, but you did what I always have tried to do in my books. Give you an example of the opposite. Chris O'Donnell plays G on NCIS Los
oh yeah.
Angeles, maybe that guy, and Minnie Driver,
Oh
two amazing
yeah.
actors. They were in a movie together years ago, one of only two movies I've ever walked out on. They established the first 45 minutes, they establish O'Donnell's character as a good guy, an honorable guy, a decent guy, the guy you'd like as your friend. They establish this character for this guy. He falls in love with Minnie Driver. It's a great love story coming together. It's sweet. It's done well. And her father has a medical emergency, is probably going to die. And she has to go back to be with his father. And the next thing you know, he's with the first hooker that shows up and lifts her skirt a little bit. And I just sat and I thought, that's not right. You've established this guy's character, not that he isn't going to fail, not that he's going to make mistakes. That's not a mistake that he would have made. That
Yeah.
simply doesn't work. And with your character, watching her maneuver as Ada tries to figure out how can I be this person I want to be inside and do it in this situation where they're training to be me to be a thief and a killer? That's everything I love. And yet that's not everybody's cup of tea, because it's somebody accused me once of being a walking mirror. Well,
Okay.
when you present a character like that in a story, and it can't help but reflect on areas where we have not been consistent in our character, or where we think we're the good guy and we look back and go, yeah, I wasn't the good guy in that situation, I could have handled that way better. So that's a tough sell, and you sold it beautifully.
I really appreciate that. I've had two not bad reviews, but comments from people that surprised me. One is a young female reader who said, well, she was looking for a happily ever after. And without ruining the book, I just don't leave you where you might think that it's going to end. And well, of course, it's also book one, but even it stands alone. But the other thing is that's life. That's what happens. I think that you have to find yourself, and that was the arc of that character. And the other thing that I recently got, and I'm not upset about this, I don't think it's totally on target, but somebody wrote a review and said, trigger child abuse. And I think that the person who's reading it has never really studied 1830 Victorian England and just has no idea. She's never read Oliver Twist.
No, for sure. Oh my
So,
God.
and so it was interesting to get that comment. Well, child endangerment, maybe. Okay, because in this day and age, none of that could happen. But, it was historically accurate. It's also fantasy, so it doesn't even matter. So, and I think that was her point. If you're going to do a fantasy, make it better than it was instead of being realistic about it. You know, I I am not a big one to talk about my own work. I'm uncomfortable with it. But I will talk a minute about Ada, about something that you may not know. I think you probably do know, but a lot of people don't know. The Ada character is actually me, a better version of me, a way better version of me, trying to cope with the unfairness of chronic illness, of and I think this will resonate. You may be one of the few people who understands. I don't think that people even who know my history would recognize that in the book, but it's the idea that it's always gonna suck, always. Okay, and it's what you make of it. So that's where I was going with the character. So she started off with everything. Careful though, she wanted adventure. Boy, did she get it.
And it's the fairy tale aspect of stories has its place for young children, but for young adults to be able to grapple with excitement and adventure in a way that shows that they're at a place in their life where they're building their own compass,
Yeah.
consciousness compass. This is where you build it during those. And I've read a lot of young adult books, and so many of them give you no markers at all for what that struggle is, or is going to be like, or possible ways to deal with that. And I get it. There's a place for fairy tales. They certainly have their value. But to write a book that allows teenagers to address things with some sense of what the bigger picture is, that's priceless. That's when you run across it. And it can be silly, and it can be out there. I mean, Randy Russell, a mystery writer that was popular at the time my mysteries were out, has written a lot of ghost stories, and he wrote one young adult novel called Dead School, or I can't. Oh my! I'll lose that friendship for forgetting the title. but it's these kids that die as high school age kids, And when they come to the afterlife, they're still in high school.
Oh gosh. Oh
Now
no.
they still got the, however it was they died,
Oh,
they still got the marks of that, like headless, what's his name in Harry Potter,
oh no.
they've still got the arrow in them or whatever it happens to be, but they are addressing all the same issues, and the character arcs are either growing or they're not, depending on the individual, and the lessons are there in a funny and outside the box way, but not everybody can do that. There are
So
lots
you
that tell
thought you got
crazy
out of
stuff.
school, but the lesson continues.
Exactly. You're not getting off that easy just because you were in a car wreck or had an archery accident or whatever. Yeah, no, it was very creative and it's very Randy,
And
but
that's great.
you know that can be done. But there's a gift to be able to have there be a bigger lesson or a series of bigger lessons, depending on how open your mind is to be able to understand it and at least look at it carefully.
Well, and here's the thing too. You don't always even, maybe you did, I didn't know what you're writing. There's somebody asked me early on if this was steampunk. Well, it started off as a short story that was steampunk, so of course it had some of the tropes in it, but then it just started to morph once the guardrails were off. And then I was just shocked to discover that it was young adult. Kids die. That's not a yeah, well, and then somebody said, well, Hunger Games. And I said, well, okay, I should be so lucky as to write something like that. But yeah, I was really surprised at where it's landing. And it's not actually, I don't know how you feel about this, but I honestly think there ought to be a genre that is women. I don't even know what you want to call this, but women from the age of 16 to 80. Those are the people reading books. And they read everything. They're reading crime novels, they're reading young adult fiction, they're reading horror, they're reading everything. So so when your publisher wants to pigeonhole it, or when you have to push it somehow, I don't even know. The only good thing that I can see coming out of this, especially, and this is the indie community, is that people are writing cross genre now. So what is it? Well, it's a little sci-fi, it's a little steampunk, it's a little, and in your case, Stick Foster was also YA. I don't know if that's what you intended, but it was
uh,
definitely.
I straddled the line and didn't know where I was, and that brings up an interesting question. When you I probably asked you this before, but I don't, way back, but I don't remember your answer. But when you wrote, do you find yourself surprising yourself during the writing? I mean, that happened to me over and over, that I would go from being the creator drawing this picture to being a person in the audience watching the picture on the big screen and writing like hell to try to keep up the
Yeah,
dictation. I don't know. What's your experience
it
with that?
was like that. I started writing a story and I thought I had a nice world. I had built this world. And then I realized that the world wasn't interesting at all. It's not, doesn't matter whether it's historically accurate. It doesn't even matter when it was. Just happened that my character was familiar with this surrounding. And so, yeah, she kind of took over. And I hear that so much from authors. I know that your Stick Foster character took over. Um, he had things to say. Um, it didn't matter whether he was in a mall or anywhere. So yeah, I found that.
I'd look back at stuff the next day when I'm editing and go, who wrote this?
Yeah,
That's how bad it got sometimes. I was frantically, sometimes as a freelance writer, you know full well when you're given an assignment, you have a contract, you're it's all about the job. It's all about putting the puzzle pieces together and getting it in on time. But with fiction, sometimes it's like somebody's taken over your brain or your soul or something. It's inexplicable,
it
but
is.
wonderful.
It is, and it really is a wonderful experience. I think I had a little moment where I guess Rick was asking me, like, am I channeling someone? This isn't you. And I said, I don't know. I'm starting to believe in reincarnation or other things could be possible here. I don't know because I really have no idea where this is coming from. I think later, I don't know how you felt about Stick Foster because there's an awful lot of of you in him. But I later I realized that she was me, but so much better than me. She's like the version I wish I could be. She put her big girl pants on at the age of 10, and I'm still doing that. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
it is fun to give the characters of that age the focus, whatever, that we have at our age, right? It's fun to do that. But the reward comes when you see kids who otherwise would be all about cell phones and hot cars and anime and whatever else it is, starting to work those questions into their own conversations. When you hear that pop up, when you hear a young person speaking beyond their age,
Yeah,
it that's the magic of reading and writing. That's all. It doesn't get any better than that.
yeah,
So
I agree. I agree. The oddest reviews I've had 5 reviews from men over 50, and I don't even know how they got the book.
yeah,
Wanting to give this to their daughters or granddaughters or whatever. And one guy wrote to me, and he's a junior high school teacher, and he says, I'm gonna make this required reading in my class. And I said,
wow.
good luck with that. They're banning books. So I don't know. The minute you make something, mandatory, somebody's gonna say no. So we'll see what happens. But it's interesting. And I know that your characters are reach out to a lot of people. I wanted to say something specifically about Ghostwalker File. I wish that you would watch the Tanya Todd interview if you haven't already seen it. She talks about that diversity in writing and whether you have the right to write outside your lane, and you do. And one of the things she said was, and you're doing all of the right things. She said, sometimes you're called to write a story, but you're not sure that you're the right person to do it. And she says, but if you're called to write, you're called to write, but you're just called to do it justice. So you have to do the research. And everything that you did is exactly what you should do. I mean, I know an awful lot of authors who have written things that you would think, what would possess you to write about that? You aren't that. But it actually puts you in touch with people who are in ways that they might not otherwise share. So I think that's good. And what Tanya was saying was that we also end up, she said, what do I only write mixed race stories? That's, I can't write anything else. So yeah, it's, I think that we all have stories to write in, and then it's about whether or not you have what it takes to put the story down. So yeah.
yeah, that whatever that is that makes you go. I mean, you know now from experience, there's more than a year of your life
Oh gosh,
goes
yes.
into a novel. I mean, that is an investment of time and interest that most people don't even understand unless they've actually tried to do that.
Yeah.
And yet the benefits of, and again, back to Getting Real, The Road to Personal Redemption, that book was written for me. That
Mhm.
book was written for Dick Todd. That's the primary audience. And if something happens beyond that, if it touches lives beyond that, that's a blessing. But I think that principle applies to almost every writer.
I think so.
If you're writing your truth, if you're trying to put into words the important life lessons that you think you're learning, then again, that's back to that find your tribe. The people who need to hear that, whether it's one or whether it's, a million readers, that's the blessing. And can you in your own head say, I struggle with this with my musical friends. I have 2 musical friends, one you've met, Charlie Lang, the
Love
other,
him.
Scott, who, is an incredible talent, I saw her on the stage at the Beacon Theater in New York with four of the most predominant female singer-songwriters in history. And she held her own 100%. And yet she's never had their publicist. She's never had their record deals. She and Charlie both struggle with this. I've never made it big. I've never made it big. I've never made it big. And I just take them both by the proverbial shoulders and shake them. And I say, do I not count?
Yeah.
Do the people that whose playlists have your music on them every day of their lives, and who stop and take a deep breath and sigh of joy when your song comes up, don't we count?
Yeah.
But as writers, our ego tells us we got to be bestsellers or we're nothing. And that's a lie. That's a huge, huge lie. Number one, I'm writing for me.
Right.
Number two, if it touches one other person. I think in Getting Real, somebody asked me that. One of my caregivers asked me that. You know, she'd hear me reading back and forth to Dick and our conversations on the phone, and as it was progressing. And she was very opinionated about lots of things, a very strong female personality. And she said, who do you think's going to read this? People going to do what the people going to do, you know, that. And my answer today is, I believe it as strongly as I did then. If one person gets real with themselves a day earlier than they would have otherwise, because Dick and I stirred some thought process going in their life. That's it. That counts.
It does.
That's huge. Is it going to make us rich? No. It's going to make us famous? No. But can my ego allow for the fact that I don't need to be a bestseller to be a good writer?
Well, I also think that when you're writing something that courageous, the reader has to be as courageous. They have to be in the right place, and they have to be willing to sit there and listen to this and understand it and take it in and ask themselves if this applies. So that's going to give you a smaller audience anyway, because courage is not the most, you know, it's not in great supply. Most of us are not extremely courageous. And when we are courageous, we're usually courageous in small ways. So
the best way I ever found to get some real sense. Now you get some feedback in reviews, and that's wonderful. But have you done a book club yet? Have you sat down with a book club yet?
No, because mine is young adult. I can't figure out what am I going to have to get a carpool together to get these people in one place?
Yeah, well, again,
moms will have to bring them.
When and if that happens for you, that will be an experience that will resonate in your heart for the rest of your life. The first time that happened to me, there was a very well-to-do community built in the suburbs of Kansas City West, you know, maybe not quite halfway to Lawrence, but, you know, gated community, and the guard at the front desk and all of that. And they had a very serious women's book club there, and they invited me. Now, so they read the book, then they invite the author to come, and then you're just open to whatever questions, comments, criticism. The honesty is brutal.
Yeah.
But the joy of hearing people who've actually read it cover to cover is one thing that it's an experience of a lifetime. It's like what the musicians get when the audience is so into them that the energy is going back and forth. There's those moments of, so, and then the other thing in that first experience was to see a room full of women fighting, literally having this heated argument about which of the two lady friends Stick Foster should actually fall for, the girl in the wheelchair or the able-bodied girl. I just sat there. It's one of the most blessed moments in my life. That 5 minutes, they forgot about me for about 5 minutes. It was the most heated discussion I'd ever watched, but to have it be about a character I created out of whole cloth, and to have them arguing like they were arguing over which presidential candidate was best for the country, I can't tell you what that was like. So I hope you get that experience sooner rather than later, because it will be one of the highlights on your road, even with the trolls in the group, you know,
Yeah.
watching someone else shut the troll down so that you don't even have to respond, you don't want to, is an amazing experience.
Well, I maybe I will. I have some ideas about how I could actually get in front of my audience. It's probably going to involve visits to high schools or junior high schools, but yeah, that'll be interesting. I think that's hilarious. And they're arguing like as if these are people they know.
Yeah, or like they're neighbors in the community, and they might as well have been gossiping about each other. I mean,
Yeah.
Real Housewives of Kansas City. I mean, it was just such a great moment.
Okay, that is success. And we don't always measure money and I mean success in money. Success is connections. And I will tell you this, as far as that is concerned, you're about as rich a person as I've ever met. You have more connections. Met you in Monhonk and I was like, oh my God, like so many people. Yeah. Yeah.
I
So,
think that's one of the things that Ellie and I share. We don't have a lot of close friends, but the people who have let us in and who have really given us a good look-see and decided we could stay, they are precious. They are so precious. And it's too bad we have to get to a certain maturity level before that dawns on us.
yeah.
But when it does dawn, it's wonderful to
Yeah.
be able to
It
look
is.
back and say, that worked out well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think it comes back to adversity. If you have led a charmed life and nothing has ever happened in your life that you've ever had to worry about where a meal is coming from or whether people, or like you or where you're, any of that stuff, there's going to be a roof over your head. Well, you really haven't lived. You don't really know what life is about. It's the adversity is where it's hard at the time, but that's where all the blessings and the lessons come from. It's where where you find out too, it's the wheat from the chaff at that point, because this is where you find out where the people who really matter in your life really are. So up until those kinds of situations, sometimes people, they play a little role in your life, but they're not really who you think they are. And then you find out. So yeah. Anyway, and you have certainly been a blessing in my life. You and Ellie both. Oh man, I got lucky with you. I got you plus
Uh,
everything. That's awesome.
yeah, you're one of the precious friends that I brought to our relationship. It's one of Ellie's best friends that was joking with me. We just had lunch with her down in Venice, Florida, the other night. She's moving up near her son in the Carolinas, and I met her son, and I couldn't remember over 25 years whether I'd actually met him. I'd seen so many pictures and heard so many stories, and I said, Scott, I said, I don't know if I've actually met you in person before. I've been trying to search my memory. And he laughed. He says, yeah, we had pizza 25 years ago and in Newburgh, New York. And Peg says, yeah, remember you told Scott that if you didn't pass muster with me, you didn't have a chance with Ellie. I said, yeah, I remember that now. Truer words were never spoken.
That's funny. That's funny. Well, Kevin, it has been a pleasure as always. Gosh, we could talk. I could keep talking to you, so we might have to have you back.
Uh, well, my pleasure always to talk to you, and I can't wait. Whatever it takes, whatever that tipping point is. You ever read that book, by the way? Tipping Point, interesting book. But when that tipping point comes to where the young adults begin to discover your book, that's going to be a fun ride. I just can't wait to watch that happen. So
I
it's
appreciate
just
that.
you're just on the edge of that wave, and so those of us watching are having a great time at your expense.
I really appreciate it. Thank you, Kevin. All right, we'll talk again soon, and I will be leaving for readers links in the bottom about everything that we talked about, so you can find Kevin and everything else that was discussed. So definitely look down below, and so you can discover about some of the stuff that we've talked about. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Kat.